Hi, everybody. All right. So today is another chance to play, and I guess the first thing I want to do is review. Yesterday I felt I thought it went really, really well. Of course, I didn't live stream yesterday. So yesterday we talked about audience. We reviewed the activity that you all did on Wednesday, and on Wednesday, if you recall, you played someone else's game, and then the goal was to respond in Google Classroom to what they had written, but that fell apart because Google wasn't cooperating for us on Wednesday. So instead, we just talked about it yesterday, and I went through, and if you remember, I read what other people had written about their game originally, and then I asked the people who had played that game system for that day to see if they agreed or disagreed, and then we kind of talked about it a little bit, and then we stepped into a little different arena, something that you may not have expected. We talked about rhetoric in games, and if you recall, we actually together read a section from this book, The New Childhood by Jordan Shapiro, and we read this little section about rhetoric. And the goal was to try to clear up basically the mess that I felt like I had made on Wednesday. So Wednesday, I just felt like the whole thing had kind of just fallen apart, and not of any fault of yours. It was totally my fault on that one. But I felt like I didn't explain things clearly. I felt like it was really confusing. I felt like I said a lot, but didn't really give you much content. And so the goal yesterday was to clarify that. So I'm just gonna take just a few minutes just to kind of review before you jump into your gameplay today, because I did feel like yesterday at the end of class, I felt like we all kind of left with a better understanding of what it is that we're supposed to be doing or looking at when it came to audience. So the tough part, I feel like, when it comes to addressing audience in games is that it's kind of like nebulous. So what's the importance, I guess, looking at audience in games? That's really the question I think we should be looking at is why are we looking at this? And we talked about the idea that when it comes to audience, that it's really, really important when it comes to like everyday life. Like you're gonna have to get a job, you're gonna have to have a job interview, and you're gonna have to any kind of communication you have within that job, you're gonna have to understand who it is that you're communicating with. So you're gonna communicate with your manager, your boss, differently than you communicate with your friends. And this carries over into social media. The way that you respond to things on social media is going to be different depending on who the audience is, right? So if one of your friends responds to something in social media, you're probably going to address them differently than you would respond to somebody else maybe you don't know as well, or at least I would hope that you would do that, right? And so I think the important part is just understanding that you have to understand who it is that you're talking with, or who you're writing to, or who you're communicating with, because that should determine how you communicate. All right, and I'm not telling you should be fake or that you should be different people. You should be different around different people. I'm just saying that maybe the professionalism with which you communicate is probably going to be different depending on who it is you're communicating with. And so then the question is what does this have to do with games? And that's what we talked about yesterday. So we talked about rhetoric. If you remember, all rhetoric is, I should probably write this down. All rhetoric is just persuading somebody of something. Okay, so all it is just rhetoric is just persuasion. Okay, and so when it comes to knowing your audience, the only way you can persuade people is to actually know who it is that you're talking to, because if you don't know your audience, it's going to be very difficult to persuade them, because you don't know what their hopes, dreams, aspirations, you don't know what they value, you don't know what their what their priorities are if you don't know who your audience is, right? The question that you're answering, and you don't have to answer this today. You can answer this. You can answer, part of it today. You can answer it. You can just wait until Monday to answer it if you want to. That's absolutely fine. I guess the thing is, some of you might need some more time to just process what this looks like in terms of your own game, because this is the question essentially that I asked you on Wednesday about a new game. But I haven't asked this particular question about the game that you've been playing, right? You've been kind of steeped in that game for a while. So my fear is that if I don't give you time to be able to process this question, that it may not make a lot of sense to you. Because first of all, I think the question is complicated, and I think it's like sequential. So I think there's like steps that we probably need to take in order for everyone to understand what the question's asking. So the question says, in what ways, and you have to name at least 4, does your game address the audience through rhetoric? So there's a few things we've got to understand here, okay? Obviously, your game refers to the game that you're playing, not the game that you were just on Wednesday, but the game that you've been playing for a while. And we've already talked about how your game addresses the audience. You've done 2 separate responses to that already, so that should probably make some sense to you. Piece is, how do they address the audience through rhetoric? Now, if I'm going to be honest, as I was writing the question, I thought to myself, like, do I even understand what this question's asking? So what I did was, I typed up what I had written on the board yesterday about rhetoric, right? And specifically in response to that Jordan Shapiro article that we had read together, about this whole idea that games convince people to do certain things, they convince people to act in certain ways within the game. And so we took a look at, like, okay, what are some specific examples of that? And so this is what we came up with. So these are some of the things you might address. And this is not a conclusive list by any means. This is just some of the things that I had written down yesterday, just kind of quick. So one is, remember, if we're looking at rhetoric in games, one of the things that you have, the game designers are persuading you to do is they're persuading you to accept the constraints of your game. So we talked about Fortnite, right? The storm. You're not going to not play Fortnite because you don't like the storm. You just accept the storm for what it is. You know that that's like out of bounds, and that's just what you do, all right? What's interesting is Jordan Shapiro goes on to talk in this book. He talks about kindergartners and the sandbox, and the whole idea that when kindergartners play, they make up rules, and it doesn't matter how ridiculous the rules are. Generally speaking, most kids try to abide by the rules, because the more people abide by the rules, less people cheat, the more time they have to actually play, and not instead of addressing, like, people cheating or those kinds of things. The same goes with the game. The less time that we spend, like, complaining about the fact that Fortnite has a storm, the more time that we can just enjoy the playtime of the game. And it doesn't matter that, so let's say, oh, I wish I had longer before the storm came. I mean, okay, that's fine, but you kind of move on very, very quickly. So the game designers persuade us to just accept the constraints, okay? So whatever your game might be, yeah, I mean, no one in here is playing Fortnite, but every single one of your games has certain constraints, okay? The Fez group, one of the constraints is you have no health bar. So you don't even know how high of a distance you can jump before your character is eliminated. It's just kind of guess and check. So that's one of the constraints, right? Let's see, one of the constraints in Minecraft is just maybe the graphics itself, right? You're not going to have ultra realistic graphics in Minecraft. At least we don't have that resource pack on there. For the Zelda group, some of the constraints, your weapons break after a while. Is it frustrating? Yeah, but you just kind of accept it and move on. You just know that you need more weapons then, okay? Another thing you can take a look at is advancing the narrative. So one of the things that game designers convince us to do is convince us to continue playing the game. No matter how disturbing the game itself might be, right? If we're playing Red Dead Redemption 2 and we know we're in a gun battle, you're going to accept the fact that you just have to shoot the other character and move on, okay? So one of the things about this accepting or advancing the narrative is no matter what the narrative might be, they convince us to continue moving. And so maybe you look at this in your game, okay? Now the only way to do this is to, of course, know your audience. So if you're writing a game that's designed more for adults, but it's not a plot line that they can get invested in, then they're not going to want to move on, okay? So when we're asking about how does rhetoric address audience, that's what we're looking at is, so for example, if we take advancing the narrative, you're going to look specifically at, okay, how does your game persuade the player to move on? And then once you address that, the second part of that is going to be, okay, now what does this tell you then about that audience? Like, who are they actually trying to persuade? Yes, the player, but what kind of player are they trying to persuade? Does that make sense? Okay, so this is like, this maybe where this gets complicated. There's actually 2 parts to this question, okay? So the first part is what are the game designer trying to convince you of, right? So I'm going to put what are you, because I'm going to assume, so you're the player. What are you? I'll put the player here. Um, being convinced to do, think, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's the rhetoric piece, right? So this is the idea of rhetoric. And then the second part of that is after you answer this, then this leads into question number 2, or to part number 2, which is who might this be designed for? Or who might this be targeting? I don't know the best way to write that. Okay, so it's like a 2-part question. Now, you don't have to write 1 and 2, but that's why I think, I didn't know how to write this question so it would be any clearer and didn't have 2 parts to it, because you're essentially doing 2 things here, okay? And we talked about, accepting the avatar, no matter how ridiculous your avatar is. I mean, in Fez, I don't even know, it looks like maybe a tic-tac with arms is what you look like. I don't even know what Fez is, but we just accept it and move on. Do we know what Fez is? The character? Because he wears one? Yeah. Yeah. So we know that he wears a Fez, but we don't know what he is. But we accept it. It's perfectly fine, right? And yeah, Super Meat Boy. Yeah, you're literally a pile of meat. I mean, I don't know. They convince you to finish the game. Rarely do you have the opportunity. You know you cannot finish the game. Most of you will still strive toward getting as close as you can, even though you know you cannot finish it in the time that we have for a unit. That takes some serious convincing. Okay? And the last one is this idea of iteration. So the fact that no matter how many times you die, you're still willing to come back and try it over and try it over and over and over again. So how do they convince you to do that? And then depending on how you answer that question, that'll tell you what kind of person do you think would be willing to keep doing this over and over and over and over again, if that makes sense, right? So my parents are probably not going to play a first-person shooter. They're probably not going to play Fortnite. That's not going to be a game that's going to interest them, okay? But maybe a game more like Zelda might interest them a little bit more, okay? Because they're more familiar with a traditional narrative versus an emergent narrative. And that's just maybe their personal preference, all right? So if you're looking at something like iteration, and like if we take Zelda, for example, so what are you being convinced to do? Well, you're being convinced to continue or to save Hyrule no matter what enemy you come across. So 2, who might this be targeting? It's going to target people who are invested in the narrative, who like traditional narrative games, who are familiar maybe with the character of Zelda, those kinds of things, all right? So that's how you should be answering it. Now, I have a feeling once you get into this, it may not be quite this easy and clean. So don't hesitate to ask questions. If you're like, yeah, I have this idea that I think like they're trying to convince me to do this, but I don't know who that might be pointing towards the audience. That's absolutely fine. Just ask the question, okay? That's what I'm here for. I'm guessing when you get into play and when you start to answer this question, it's not going to be this neat or this clean. And so for that, I apologize. So we'll just have to kind of see how this goes. All right? But you have today. And if it were me, to be honest with you, I would take today and I would just play, but with that in the back of your mind, thinking, okay, what am I being convinced of? What am I being convinced of? Because you probably have never played like that before. And so you're probably going to need some time to process. You have plenty of time on Monday to be able to actually answer this question, okay? Now, if you want to jump in and just start answering right away, if you're like, yes, I have this great idea, I need to get this out now, that's absolutely fine. You can't today. If you need more time to process it, okay, with that in the back of your mind, please do that. Okay? So what questions do you have? Yeah. Yeah, this is on Google Classroom right now. Yep. Like I said, you have today, you have tomorrow. Yeah, to be able to. It's not due till the end of class Monday. And here's the other thing too. If on Monday, if we get halfway through the class period, I'm going to check in with you and see, okay, does this make sense? Is this just too complicated of a question? Are you able to answer this? Can you figure out both parts of it? And if this whole thing just falls apart, then we'll come back and kind of reevaluate and see, okay, do we need more time? Or is this more of like a class discussion kind of thing? Or do you just nail it and we're good to go? So does that help? Okay, what other questions? Perfect. All right. So remember, we don't have as much time today, so I don't know what time we're out of here. I can't remember. Okay, so you do have about 30 minutes to play. All right. So I'm going to stop you with like 5 minutes left in class, just to kind of wrap up. But for now, go out there, play. I'll be around to ask you questions like I normally am. All right, and we'll get moving on this. So let's start with we're going to jump in Minecraft first, maybe. All right, Minecraft group. We're going to jump in with you first. All right. So let me make sure all of this is set up here for that, and we'll. So the first group we're hitting today is going to be our Minecraft station, and it looks like these guys have started a new world. So now, oh, you're in survival. Oh man. So what? So you've done creative, you've done like the mini games, and now you're survival. Why survival now?
Because I thought it would do better with answering the questions. Like with accepting constraints, there's more constraints in survival than there is in like creative or something.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Do you still like playing survival?
I do. I don't know if Matthew does.
Not so much.
No.
Are you just not a fan of Minecraft anymore?
I mean, I'll play it, but I just build.
You like creative.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be back here. All right. All right, so we're at Zelda Breath of the Wild station here. And you guys have been playing this for a while now. Now you've already actually beaten the game, right?
Oh yeah, I have.
All right. So is this our Switch or is this your Switch?
Oh, this is your guys'.
Okay. All right. Now at one point, there's two people in this pod. At one point, both of them were playing Zelda on two separate Switches, which was highly entertaining. So let me ask you, as far as like constraints to this game, are there any constraints in the game that make you that are like so obvious that it like frustrates you in terms of like a game mechanics perspective?
One thing I really don't like is like with the stamina, like at the beginning of the game you don't have very much, so when it comes to like climbing and swimming, it can deplete very quickly. But like later in the game you can upgrade it and get a lot more.
Okay, so let me ask you then, is this, I mean, because it almost seems like kind of a strange game mechanic, at least to me, it always seemed like a strange game mechanic. But, I mean, why do you think they'd put the stamina in there?
Because I think some parts of the game would be too easy if like with like climbing and swimming portions. I think it'd be too easy to get through if you didn't have stamina.
Okay, I mean, I guess plus two, it makes it much more realistic, right? Because, I mean, you can't run forever, you can't swim forever, you can't climb forever, so I guess that makes sense. All right, so then I guess the next question is does the constraint of, like, stamina, does that point to a particular, type of player, do you think, or not?
I don't really think so.
Like, mechanic that used to maybe make the game a little more...
Yeah, probably.
Okay. I know some people would argue like the constraints of a game are what helps make it immersive because it does feel a little more.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And I think it was earlier this week or maybe it was last week we were talking about player types. And I know, I think someone said the idea that this game is probably made more for, I can't remember if it was achievers and explorers or killers and explorers. But I mean, what are your thoughts on like who do you think, what player type do you think would enjoy this game the most?
I think probably explorers and achievers. Explorers because it's such a massive game. There's so many different things that you can do, and probably achievers because there's like a lot of different things you can achieve. Like there's not only getting like to the end of the game, but then there's also the many shrines that you can complete, and like once you complete them all, you get like the classic Link outfit from like the green tunic from like the past games. So you gotta be stuff like that for achievers.
Oh, that's cool. All right. So there's a reward for exploring as well. All right, cool. Okay, now we're over to our Fez pod here. Pretty unique game, and it looks like you're swimming in spaghetti sauce. Okay.
This weird place, and now I don't know where I'm going. Like, I got another artifact.
Oh. Okay.
But now I don't know how to get back to the main door.
Okay, so here's the question then: what's making you go on? Like, why do you want to? I mean, you're just swimming in like spaghetti sauce. Why do you want to keep going?
So I can move to a different world.
All right, in the hopes that you'll stop swimming in spaghetti sauce, or Kool-Aid, or
Blood.
yeah, the dark side goes blood, but yeah, I don't know exactly what that is. How did you get in this?
So there's a world where, like, there's a bunch of doors, and you get these thingies, and, like, that's number 2, like, that thingy, and that's, 3, it's 1, I don't have number 4, but I looked it up on a walkthrough.
Yeah, okay. So here's the other thing. So, I think one interesting piece, and this is one thing we haven't talked about yet, but so the idea of using those images to represent numbers, right, is an interesting concept. Definitely one that fits into technical reading in terms of being able to recognize that iconography can also serve as like a kind of text, right? So it's not just like, I mean, they could just put 1 and put 2, but they didn't. They decided to use like. You just use 1 and 2, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
boring.
Yeah. Plus, it's almost like makes you like prove that you like really love the game if you're willing to like learn that language too, right?
Yeah. It's helpful that you have that thingy, though.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a little Fez cheat sheet for numbers and letters. Do you think you'll ever come out of this?
I don't know. Feels like I've been swimming for like 5 minutes straight. Looks like I'm not going anywhere.
What happens if you just go straight down?
You can't.
You can't go down?
Uh-uh.
Can your character sink or?
Nope.
Can you? Oh.
You can jump.
His hat's holding him up. That's his buoyancy is the Fez. All right, that's fair. And if you switch perspectives, it doesn't. If you go back the other direction. How long you been swimming?
A while.
Talk about rhetoric in games. The fact that you just kept swimming, it's pretty impressive, actually. Your little tic-tac with the Fez just keeps moving, huh? It does, doesn't it? Or like a marshmallow. I don't know if that's. I don't know.
Maybe it's a marshmallow.
Now, do you feel like you're kind of like attached to him now?
No.
No. You just let him drown. That'd be cold. You might want to restart the. Can you restart? Can you go back?
No.
Oh. This is gonna be a long class period, isn't it?
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll let you have fun swimming through your spaghetti sauce. All right, so we're back to our HTC Vive pod here with the Wizards, and apparently they're lost.
Okay, I know, but we gotta find that thing. Is it? No, it's not. This stupid door's locked. I don't know what these stupid crystals are.
You sound like maybe getting a little frustrated.
Yes.
So it's okay. So what makes you want to keep moving on? Like, why not just give up?
I want to have the satisfaction of beating.
Sorry,
My
That's
bad.
fine, you're good.
Oh,
You're good.
jeez.
You're good.
Now I can.
All right. So what's it like watching someone play this?
Boring.
You want to be the one playing?
Yeah. Just
All right. So we're far enough in the game that you have to understand what's happening in order to really keep going, right?
yeah. It still gives you some clues.
Who gives you clues?
It just shows like subtitles at the
Oh,
bottom.
subtitles. Okay,
I
got
think
it.
it talks. It's like a guy talking to you sometimes too.
Okay. All right. Looks like you got some clues there. Looks like you need 3 of those things. I don't know.
Yeah, we need 3, but I don't know where to find them. We already have 1.
Okay. Oh, I see. You just need the other 3.
But we can't find it.
Okay.
I don't know where to go. Maybe go back.
Okay. So here's the interesting thing. So even though it's not crystal,
up here.
even though it's not crystal clear where it is at 100% you're supposed to go, you still are willing to go through all the trouble just to try to find the other 2, right?
Yeah.
Now you're trash talking.
Be on the
VR.
lookout for more ambushes.
Yeah,
These caverns probably hide more of them than we can imagine. They just can't get enough of you, can they? Stuff some fireballs.
Uh-oh. Good luck. Does the shield stop melee attacks too?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But after like 3 hits, after 3 hits,
Yeah. Oh, it's done?
yeah.
Oh, I see it. I see. Nicely done. Nicely done.
Oh, can't believe I blocked it.
Okay, so how many spells do you think you know at this point? How many?
6 or 7.
There's 6 or 7 spells that you know at this point. All right. You have to memorize them all, right? Okay. Okay, is memorizing a spell on here like memorizing like a list of facts for like a class?
It's harder.
Memorizing the spells are harder?
No, the class. Memorizing class would be harder
Why do you think it's harder?
because it's not something I'm interested in.
It's not literally life or death, right?
Yeah.
But learning spells, at least in this game, it is. Okay, all right, that's fair.
What the heck?
All right, so we're back to our board game pod here, and they have switched games from This War Is Mine. And how many times, how many rounds did you play of that one?
Of This War Is Mine, or This War of Mine, 4 times, maybe 5.
Okay. What made you switch to Pandemic?
Well, this War of Mine is very difficult game, and this seems a little more simpler.
All right, so we're talking about iteration, right? The idea of like attempting it over and over and over again. You kind of had your fill of iteration, right?
Yeah, but the cool thing about this War of Mine is it's different every single time that you play.
Okay, which is interesting. I mean, so you have that emergent narrative piece that kind of goes along with it. All right. So so after playing it that many times, do you think that that game is really designed for anyone in mind?
Maybe the older people, like the older teens to young adults, I would say.
Okay. All right. So what do you think of Pandemic so far?
Well, we haven't really done much yet since we just set up the board.
Oh, got it. All right, I'll let you guys play. Go ahead. All right, so the bell is going to ring here in about 5 minutes. So, as you all wrap up your games here, remember you still have Monday to play. Answering that question about how you see rhetoric played out in your game, and then what kind of audience I might point towards. All right. What questions do you have before we end here? Questions? You're all too ingrained in your games. That's cool. That's what I want. Yeah, it's good. All right. Have a great weekend.